I'm Jeff Brickler. I am the one half of the Integrate Intelligently podcast, sponsored by CAD. Along here with two very distinguished guests, Scott Brickler, the CEO of CAD Talk, and Victor Purolnik, founder as well of TrustShoring. Victor, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Victor, it's great to see you. We typically have, I feel like I see you on your Looms on Facebook. And then, of course, I think I follow you well on LinkedIn. And, of course, we see you at various events. So where are you located today? I know that typically you live in Poland, but you're often here in the U.S. and then all across Europe.
Actually, Berlin, Germany is my home base. And then,
okay.
I travel a lot around Europe and, of course, the States. That's right. That's where we catch up most of the time at the SaaS Academy.
That's usually the case. That's usually the case, yeah.
Definitely. So keeping things busy for sure.
Yeah, I haven't, I don't travel again to Europe until I think probably next year. But I think last year not this year, I traveled only 2 or 3 times to Europe, but last year, no, maybe 4 times this year. But last year, I think it was like 6 or 8 times.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot. I love going to Europe, but I'm sure like you love coming to the States, but it wears on you. That back and forth, it wears on you.
It does,
especially when you go and you're only there 3 or 4 days, and then you got to come back. It can be tough.
I try to not even bother with the time zone difference, so I just get up very early in the States.
Yeah, that's all you can do. Yeah, that's all you can do.
Makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, Victor, I have here in my notes that you're a computer guy, right? You had a computer science guy, you're a software developer. I feel like the odd man out. The only one here who wasn't an engineer, wasn't a computer developer. But is that right? You're from Germany. You're of German descent, right? And you live in Berlin, and software is your background. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Actually, computer science and engineering management. So I do have that bit of the management degree in there as well. But yeah, absolutely. And Jeff, we do need a couple of non-tech guys to actually keep things together, I think. So that's very good.
Yeah, that's good. I won't have my ego bruised by being the least technical guy in the room. So a certain amount of pride, right, comes with that technical knowledge, because you just so few people have that technical knowledge. Now, of course, you got to be able to translate that into something that people can understand.
Yeah, I think as always, the importance lies in bridging disciplines, right? Because if you look at a business, it's nothing without the marketing side. It's nothing without the tech side. If it's a tech business, but it's nothing without operations, sales, customer support, none of that, right? So in a way, everybody matters, and you see that, which funnily is one of the questions that I get asked the most is when hiring remotely. I know maybe we don't want to jumpstart right into this, but it just fits. Is that can a developer steal my code and launch their app? Right? Is somebody in a remote country where the U.S. jurisdiction just has nothing against them, or And the simple answer is no. We've never seen that happen in like 12 years. Why? Because developers know absolutely nothing on average about bringing your nail salon booking application to market. Like absolutely nothing.
Your nail salon, right. Because it's like the industry. We talk a lot. CAD Talk's a niche software, and so many softwares are niche these days, right? Because all the big things are covered by the big players. Like, I don't want to compete with Google or Microsoft or Facebook. I don't want to mess with those. So everything's niche. So you have to have that very specialized knowledge. So even if you had the code and you linked it on, it was linked on the internet, it's like, well, right, but you have to know all these other things about that business, about this, all of that, just to make it work. It's hard enough when we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this ideal, right? It's like the SaaS or the developer's dream to launch a micro SaaS, become independent. That's like a mantra in the development world, and it's possible, But we see that, for example, our most successful clients are those who come from a niche, and then you might say it's a disadvantage that you're a non-technical founder, but to me it's an advantage because you know something outside of tech, which is very important. For example, I've run a few businesses and everything, but I don't run a SaaS, even though I love SaaS. I've been in SaaS for 12 years because I've seen so many clients of mine try to launch a product in a niche they don't understand and fail. And it's a very expensive lesson that I'd rather not try. Whereas when people have that inside knowledge, have the market access, have the understanding, have a Rolodex of people to dial up, or even better, launched a prototype within their own business in that industry that helps them grow and scale and manage, and then release that as a product for others. That is what really works. And so what I can do is I can either do SaaS for SaaS or SaaS for developers, which are the two most saturated SaaS industries there could possibly be, right? Because everybody who doesn't have a better idea will do either of those. That's how I feel. At least it's very tough to compete in there.
Yeah,
you have a good point, Victor. Because I remember bringing in developers over time, and they would always ask me like, what were the keystone skills of a developer? And I would say, I'm self-taught, so I was an engineer taught developer. But I mean, keystone skill would be, debugging is huge, right? Is like a really keystone skill, but domain knowledge has to be the single biggest differentiator for a developer. If you can learn the domain from which you're coding, it's a superpower, because like you can answer 1,000 questions that most people would need requirements for, because you understand what the customer's experiencing. And just as you're alluding to earlier, it's like you can have the source code, but the source code does not make a business. When you think about how many open source packages are out there where the source code is literally published, and there's complete businesses who make millions and millions or billions of dollars a year supporting that open source software, because business actually is a lot bigger than just the code. So,
right, completely. And with those open source programs or with anything like that, really, what we see mostly, especially early stage. Let's take a SaaS that's just being founded, super early stage, bootstrap, low on capital, right? But even if it's a funded business, the advantage of the developer, the solo developer that actually knows a niche, right, is that they can communicate. Well, they don't have to communicate at all to iterate in their head on certain ideas and the easiest implementations to reach certain goals. Whereas if you split that role into two, you already have friction on communication, which is verbal and thus fairly slow and unprecise. So something that you can just figure out in your head as a industry expert developer within a couple of hours might take weeks if those are two people. So that's like the superpower of the developer who actually knows a certain niche, for sure. Yeah.
It seems like everything kind of breaks down into communication costs at some point. I mean, that's the whole mythical man month type of thing. Like, really, the mythical man month applies to almost every industry, if you really think about it. And like, we were actually doing a podcast earlier about ERP and really think about it, it's a communication tool in order to get humans to kind of get on the same page about what to do. And I mean, obviously the most effective developer, if you actually have one developer create a software that actually is the best software, it just takes too darn long to make it. That's the issue with that. So, I mean, so it's like, that's why you have to have teams that have that communication cost. But it does seem like the scaling and the communication is the limiting factor of almost every industry.
Yeah. And I found that pretty fascinating because that's what Elon Musk essentially said, his opinion on why we'll have to integrate our brain with AI or with other systems is because the one advantage AI has over us is that it can plug into information much faster than us, because our data input and output is limited by what we can see or talk, which he he calculated the bit rate of that, which obviously was nothing
Low.
compared to what you could feed into an AI, right? And so he says, well, we will have to find other ways to integrate our brains with information, because that is the actual advantage. And so you can think of AI and whatnot, whatever you will, but like that fact of the input and output speed and the communication, there is something to be said about that.
Oh yeah, I mean the bit rate. I mean, it just, you can have it to where if I can explain a concept, I have an idea in my mind, and then you exactly have the idea, like the formulation of that idea in your mind is exactly the same as mine. Then the key cost goes to zero, and then it's basically having like two minds, but with the benefit of all your experience and my experience combined. Now, like imagine that. So it's like, yeah, and I kind of, I mean, you talk about building out a team. I mean, that's the dream. You always say like, I want to clone myself. So how do I do that? And so that way we have these, but actually it's even better if I can just transfer my idea to you and also take advantage of your experience. That's even better than cloning me.
Right.
Which I think really segues nicely to what you do at your company, which is building a team out. So how do you do, like, what's the best way to do that? Like, Jeff, I don't know if I know you have some other questions too, but I'm just really intrigued. Like, how do you do that? Especially when you talk about going international with teams that don't even have the same language and things like that. It's more and more challenge, but this communication idea is really, I think it's the thing. It's the thing that keeps us going. So,
yeah, it is. Well, you have that challenge anywhere, right? Being on site makes communication easier for sure, but oftentimes also less structured. And so it depends on a lot of things what makes sense. Ultimately, there's no ideal solution for anything out there, right? It's just what sucks less, right? Is having remote people that you can afford, that have a great skill set, that you don't have to headhunt for like 12 months. Does that give you the advantage that you need, or is it, well, I'll pay anything I have to pay, but I want people to be on site in house, right? And for some other people that might also be a lifestyle decision, right? Because they want to travel, and so they don't really care. And so it's about a lot of factors what actually is best. But in terms of how do you solve these remote issues, right? Which one of them is communication, the other one is accountability, right? When you're on site, you at least get the illusion of more control. And remote company culture is obviously harder. And when you have people, well, remote can be you're in New York and you're in DC, but remote can obviously be much further away, and so you come into cultural differences or language barriers. Especially the cultural differences are often overlooked, and so those are real problems to think about and to try and understand and understand how can I, what not to do to make things unnecessarily hard, right? And so yes, you oftentimes have, so time zone is a big one. There are reasons why having somebody far away is actually beneficial, right? Either because you have other people or clients or suppliers or whoever in that time zone already, and so that makes things easier, or you have a workflow where you prepare things and they're ready in the evening, and then somebody else can take over, work on them during your night, and then you wake up to something you can further process, right? So there may be instances where that makes sense, or if you want 24/7 support or coverage for your clients, or you just have a very specific talent pool at a very specific price point in a specific region, and that just is so important to you that you make the time zone difference work. But of course, in general, the less overlap you have, the more difficult it is to work together, for sure. I mean, you guys also have people in different places, right?
Yeah, we were on a call the other day. I think we had like 4 continents on one call. It was pretty amazing. I was like, it was like I had to stop everybody and say, realize that right now that we're talking from 4 different continents, and it was like kind of strange to think about it. But just it's miraculous. Like, in a lot of ways too, is because you get to take advantage of the talent globally, which is something that, and there's talent everywhere. I think there's kind of I believe sometimes that all the talent's in the West, and that's just not true. I mean, it's just there's very, very smart people all over the world. And if you can find them and you can learn how to work with them, it's a huge advantage. It's a huge advantage.
Yeah, and I think the two industries that everybody thinks about when or at least before COVID, when it's about remote hiring, it's about tech, right? Developer talent, and usually you think about Eastern Europe or India. And the second industry is, and also most people think about outsourcing, right? It's customer support, Indian call centers, things like that come to mind, right? You call Microsoft, so these are the two industries that I feel people use to associate the most with hiring remote talent. But also historically, and I know that was definitely the case when I started out, people did believe that was an inferior solution. And there's from very early on, what I told people was you don't go to cheaper country to then hire the cheapest person there. You're just trying to get more bang for your buck, right? And especially now, 10 years later, 15 years later, there are so many people who have previous experience working remotely for a U.S. company. So even that culture, that work culture, all of that is absolutely not a new thing to many people. And you need to very deliberately understand, who do I want to hire with what previous experience? Is that somebody that's just starting out? Do I want to cross-train someone? Or am I actually looking for a senior engineer? Am I looking for just a terrific salesperson? Am I looking for an accountant who might actually have experience with international accounting standards and how everything in the U.S. works, right? Completely exists. And that's what I actually heard that from a client just this week, that they were very hesitant to go over. And that was not about engineers, because for engineers, most of that is already past. Like, people know that there's enough good people abroad to work with, but especially for, let's say, customer success people, right? So they never thought they could have hired somebody this competent. And yes, for a fraction of the cost and whatnot, but it's just about the accessibility of the talent. And that was mind blowing for them. And usually when we see somebody make the first hire, they will continue. But that first hire is obviously the toughest to just to convince people to try it out. Especially if somebody doesn't come from the remote first, bootstrap, tech startup bubble, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things that we I know internally we did a lot to prepare for was like communication styles, like asynchronous communication and using systems and project management systems and things like that to kind of make sure that the ideas don't get, because it's a lot easier. You tend to have certain habits if the person's right next to you, or if they're on the same time zone, you can just IM them and get an answer. But when we started going across time zones, and the communication disciplines had to be tighter in order to make things work. And there's a little bit of growing pains with that. I mean, you had to learn that. But overall, we found that what was really interesting was, like, a side benefit of that was it made all of our documentation and our knowledge bases so much better. So it's kind of like you expand at the extremes. Like, by having to do that, it was a gateway drug to an even better systems and processes and things like that. So it's kind of like an interesting way. Like, you kind of get two problems solved with one move. Yeah,
true. And there's usually two stages of a company, and so the first stage, where the founder tries to hire the cheapest resources available just because they need to get the most for their money, but is willing to micromanage. So time is worth less than money, right? So you're going hard on SOPs to describe everything in detail, trying to build process, and then hire the cheapest resource out there to just implement, right? And that's like stage one, and that's where remote work helps, because you can really get cheap talent early on, and that's awesome. But then it really shifts towards, well, now I need to make sure that I bring in the A players, and what that means is you then need to look for people who are really self-driven, self-accountable, who because that's you can't really, because in the first mode, let's say, what you would do is you'd have all these accountability measures, right? You'd have checklists, you'd have time tracking, you'd have people used to record screens and stuff, but I think that's luckily a thing of the past, because it matter, the result matters. And so once you have like project management set up and you really micromanage people, then fine, right? You get your result, but then you move on to more goal setting and letting the A players deliver, but also then building out more higher level process and SOPs, not every step, but just like checklists, right? Of like, this is what it means. This is what an interview means at TrustShoring, right? But then a very competent recruiter will be able to use that and implement that, right? That's, for example, the case for us. And it's a transactional versus transformational leadership style, right? And so understanding what mode you're in and what you're hiring for is super important, because then you get the right type of talent in there.
Absolutely. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it gets more and more, like you said, into, I mean, growth is all about it's like the talent really becomes the fuel for the growth. And then having more flexibility around where you can source that talent is really the key. I mean, it ends up being, I think that every company has two growth engines. One is the sales, and the other one is the recruiting. And because those two have to be in sync, otherwise you really stifle your growth. I mean, we've even seen that happen to us, where our sales would outpace our ability to implement and things like that. And then making sure that and then kind of getting those two things in balance is always, it's the trickiest job there is. And building and company building, right? And people hack it by doing venture capital. They get money, they hire the people first, then they go do the sales. And then, if you're bootstrapped, you have to do it slightly differently, things like that. So absolutely. Jeff, I know you had some other questions lined up, so I'm going to make sure.
I was thinking about, you talk about the culture, and your company is TrustShoring. How did you, what motivated you to start a company that helped find remote talent, and TrustShoring and I mean, essentially you're in not just the business of, finding talent, but you're kind of in the business of joining cultures together.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it. How I got into TrustShoring, it's a good question. I early on, I was very early on. I was still at university. I co-founded, and that was completely random how I got into that. I just met Ukrainian developers at a conference, and we co-founded a software house, which is still alive to this day and is still one of our best partners. But while growing the software house, I realized that I had, through everything that I saw, I had developed more high-level strategies, because every software house should have a niche. The ones that aren't great, they don't understand that. But they should have a niche. They should have a specialization. They should have certain positioning. And so you're creating a very narrow solution for a certain type of client. But I was really seeing the larger patterns in the industry, what type of software house you should use when, where they're located, how to structure all of that. And so that's when I decided to leave the venture. I sold my shares, founded TrustShoring, and so TrustShoring became early on an advisor really to SaaS companies, and then a matchmaker to software houses, to which we later on added. So the advisory, the loose advisory that I gave to people that people appreciated before they got matched to the right software house that was tried and trusted, turned into a fractional CTO and CPO service. So we now provide fractional CTOs and fractional CPOs, and those are super experienced people with just leadership experience in scale up. So these are not outsourced people. These are people from the trenches growing the actual businesses. And then we added recruiting a few years later, and that's actually our biggest focus right now. So recruiting and the fractional advisory, because there was, and I don't know if you want to go into that, but there was a very big shift during COVID on how people approached hiring talent remote.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, COVID changed everything. So, what did you see? Just an uptick in people wanting to have remote talent, or just more remote talent everywhere?
It's not just that. It's how you want to hire the remote talent. So back in the days, we're talking 10, 12 years ago, when I still had to explain to people where Ukraine even was on a map, right? It was very hard to hire someone directly. There was a lack of trust, like would my person even show up in the morning? Wire transfers were not that easy. You contract, all of that it was very hard for people to make a remote hire directly. And so what you had were these software houses that sort of took that away and offered an abstraction layer and said, look, we have the talent. You just pay us and we'll develop software for you. But the thing is that an agency, if you take that in your original sense, always meant, well, they come with more than just the people. They come with a process. They come with maybe even something close to a fixed price quote, right? A client comes, says what they want. And I know obviously in software that is not always easy to do, but in general, the idea is, well, the client comes with an idea, the software house gives advice, creates a concept, prices that in a certain way and implements it, right? That's across marketing agencies or whatever agencies. That's sort of the function of an agency, is to provide the turnkey process to deliver a result, right? And that sort of got lost in the software development industry, and most software houses, and there's people just leaving software houses, developers leaving software houses, starting their own with their friends. And it was really just about, I have a few friends, I have talent around me, I'll just try to sell that ideally on a retainer with minimal oversight or control, and mark that up at least 50% because I'm now a software house. And so most of, or a lot of the industry turned that way. And during COVID, the big mental switch that happened within SaaS companies, mostly really bootstrap SaaS companies, the smaller ones, not the enterprise, but the smaller ones, is said, why am I actually doing this? I could just hire a developer directly. And before COVID, 8 out of 10 requests or clients who came to us wanted to work with a software house. 2 years later, 8 out of 10 people wanted to hire their developers directly.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was that dramatic. And that's
one of those
where
cheaper rates, I guess. Is that why? Because they hire directly? No?
Not even. No. It's funny. You don't even, like, the developers took that as a chance too to get their rates raised, right? And it's just that if you have a great software house, they add tremendous value because they give someone who doesn't understand the leadership side, the tech leadership, the product leadership,
right,
the process side, they give them that, and they really help them build software. And so that still has its place. If you have a good software house, you're always going to have work because there are enough people who need that sort of support. But what happened is that the business model of just reselling developers, that pretty much fell away, especially since you have the rise of the employer of records like Deal. Many people just don't care anyway, right? Because in a lot of countries, to be frank, it's not that big of a deal to hire someone as a contractor. You do need to be somewhat aware of what you're doing, but generally it's still sort of possible. That might change in the next few years, but generally it's still possible. And so it's easy to fly under the radar, at least if you're a small SaaS company. And so it's not that big of a deal to hire someone. And many people just see that software house that has its own set of interests, even though they're adding no value, as more of a nuisance and a risk factor, because you have that single point of failure in there now that has all your developers, like what happens if your relationship to the software house sours or whatever, what have you, right? You just suddenly don't have your team anymore. And so that's a big fear that a lot of people have as well, which is why don't if the talent is all I'm getting, why don't I just hire my own developers? And so that's where we saw that big shift away from the software houses towards getting the talent, but at the same time, people still needed a bit of hand-holding to actually build that process. But they now preferred, if they could, they prefer to build that knowledge in-house as opposed to outsourcing it. That's your core as a SaaS after all, right? And so that's where we came in with our recruiting service, add on to that an employer of record, and add on to that the fractional CTO and the CPO, and we sort of have the same things covered for our clients, but it's their team now.
It makes a lot of sense because you think about, like, as a software company, the product is so essential that and I think I even watched the interview with Hermosi when he created the Allen product, because he was very good at, he started up and he actually outsourced it to a dev shop, and he realized that that was because there was an episode of what business are you in? And he realized in the software business, you're in the product business, as opposed to in the gym business, you're actually in the sales and marketing business, and figuring out what business it was. And with software, it was definitely the product, and he outsourced the product. And he thought that was such a lesson for him to learn that. And that, and they brought it back in and they proved the product or whatever. But it was a big lesson to figure out what business actually are you actually in software. And it is, the product is a huge part of it. And then, and having control over that and being able to, understand that is a big part of it. But it's not everything, as we mentioned earlier in the conversation, but it's a huge part of that business.
Sure.
Product.
I mean,
yeah.
on the flip side, I don't want to do agency bashing, because there's a lot of really good ones out there, and they have their place. There's a lot of reasons to hire a software house, even as a SaaS company. Whether it's an MVP where you need a multi-skill team for 6 months, right? You're not going to hire them. It makes no sense. And especially if you're non-technical on top of that, it just makes more sense to get that turnkey done and validate that. And you just need to know a bit what you're doing, work with a good partner. But other than that, there's a lot of reasons to work with a software house. And so we explore that on individual cases, one-on-one with our clients, what makes sense when. But it's just true as well that there were too many people just trying to make a quick buck or take advantage of clients, and that wasn't great.
I mean, I think that's a great example. I could use an example that even we have internally is that we are, a lot of our devs and our team and everything are really good at integration, which is what we do, right? Mm-hmm. But we're also looking at moving to different UI platforms, right? So there's all these different UI technologies that are out there that we look at, and it's just not our specialty. So great case for a software house. Somebody who knows the UI platform, who could work with our APIs and build something out that's probably better than we could do, because we have to learn all that technology. And that would be a great case for an agency.
Totally. Yeah. Especially if you have to bring together multiple skill sets for a limited period of time. So for example, UI, UX design, front-end development, packaging that up maybe as a mobile app or whatnot, and have that knowledge with you and have the process to go about it, to be able to estimate it, all of that. It is incredibly useful to work with a software house and something like that. So absolutely, yeah.
Victor, what I'm always interested in kind of the cultural. How do companies span those cultural differences, right? I mean, even if the language isn't a barrier, and the person you're speaking with speaks English, there's always going to be cultural differences, communication styles. There's recently a book, you probably have read this or know, that's called The Culture. I think it's called The Culture Map, where it's a book about communication styles and different cultures. I mean, how do you navigate that, or what do you recommend, people you work with to help? Because communication isn't just the words, right? It's also the nuance, the way people respond, where the answer, what you think the answer is, what they say is different from what they mean, right? There are those opportunities.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that book you actually got. I think I actually got that book recommendation from you, Victor. Actually, for the culture map.
Possibly. I talk about it
Yeah.
a lot indeed. It's the culture map by Aaron Meyer, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see it laid out, right? Because for the listeners, what it does, it has a few axes. There's an online tool you can subscribe for just a few dollars to click around. So it's really cool. But you have a few axes, for example, on how people disagree, right? If they do that directly or indirectly, how they I don't know the right word that was used in there, but like how they take their orders, right? If they see someone in a position of authority because of their skills or because of their title, right? And so that is then being mapped. All these countries are being mapped on these scales, and it's super interesting, especially once you see that in action. And it explains a lot of our most misunderstandings between people from different cultures, and especially Eastern and Western, but also within those hemispheres, you do have significant differences. But yeah, that is interesting. And to be frank, same as with time zones. Unfortunately, I still think that the closer you stay to your own culture or time zone, the easier it is to work. There's something to be said, of course, about different cultures, different people bringing different viewpoints, and those are very valuable. I do agree. But unless you know how to work with a certain culture,
Right.
that is probably a bigger barrier than the benefits it would bring. But it doesn't take much to learn that. So if you're serious about it and you want to learn a bit, that book is a great start. It makes a lot of sense, but probably the easiest way to go about it is just to stay somewhat similar and then try to figure out for example, we're talking about software engineers, right? And so what I see Americans go through relatively frequently is the shock of working with very direct Eastern European developers, right? The client told me that last month. It's like, nobody's ever disagreed this openly with me on an issue. Yep, welcome. And- but he said, that's great. I love that, right? And but that is definitely like Eastern Europe, especially Ukraine. It has, or Poland. There's a high level of direct disagreement. If somebody just disagrees with an idea, nothing negative. It's just how do you phrase that, right? And so that is being phrased very directly, which somebody who's not aware of that might find offensive, right? But if you know and you understand and you've experienced that a bit, you adjust and that's fine. And that's not a big. There are bigger cultural differences, right, than that. But it's just a small nuance that you see relatively frequently, and you have that across a lot of. And so what you see is, for example, we hire a lot of great people in South Africa, and they're extremely empathetic. It's tough to generalize, right? You should never generalize like that.
Sure.
But still, like there is that cultural element, and so for customer success and for sales, it's brilliant. It's a bit better than somebody telling you that your entire solution is crap and you should do something completely different, right? So that's sort of the cultural difference that you see there. And obviously one might work in different scenarios than another, but our entire sales and marketing team is in Africa versus all the technical people are in Eastern Europe. And actually, we never designed it this way. It's just the people who applied and ended up having the best scores in those certain areas ended up being in those regions, which is very interesting. We never decided that we only want to hire for this position in that area.
Yeah, I having come from being a teacher, but also from a language background, I was always fascinated with cultural differences because I was studying ancient cultures, which is you have both time and differences in time, cultural differences from time, but also from just different regions. And having lived in Europe, And having worked more recently with Eastern Europe or even the Middle East, and I began to notice a lot of cultural differences there in terms of, like you said, to Eastern Europe, very, very direct. Customers I've had be very, very direct, even on demonstrations, which you wouldn't, not bad, but you wouldn't get that from an American, right? You just would not get that level of engagement.
Yep. Yep, for sure. And even though you're building remote teams, for me, the key, and it's already been that way when we were agency matchmaking, the key to good company culture and a good understanding of the culture and to each other is still meeting up in person. Absolutely. And so having a team retreat, meeting your software house. You don't have to do that all the time or every year, but what you do during that first visit transfers so much non-business, non-day-to-day information, the body language, all the people understand each other better then. And so that's like the number one hack. If you want that flight ticket, that hotel, whatever, it's
so much.
Yeah.
I found that even with, I have visited partners, customers, I've gone there to build a relationship, and huge difference.
Yep.
Huge difference. It's just because you can say so much just by showing up, not even using words, just being there.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think, how can I improve our culture? And let's make that Friday afternoon Zoom call, all hands Zoom call, where everybody who wants to can grab a beer, and it's super awkward. Nobody has anything to say. Ends up being the CEO's monologue. I've been there. Was
that you? That was you.
That was me. Obviously the only one with a beer too, but jokes aside. But once you meet up, right, then suddenly, and people socialize a bit, suddenly that conversation, that Friday afternoon Zoom call, it suddenly works. People suddenly talk. People suddenly catch up. People work together more. You're not that single person that people keep coming to. They start interacting with each other more. It really is it improves communication culture and in everything. Overall productivity, effectiveness, people understanding the vision, the mission more, people understanding the customers more, everything. So yeah, that's like if anyone has any remote people but has not met them yet, I mean, not one-on-one, but like bring them in to the team. It depends where you have more people, right? But do an actual retreat with everybody, or if you have a software house, go there as your representative of your company. It's an absolute must.
Agreed. I saw a huge, in the same respect, huge benefit when I traveled to Europe, and I went to a lot of different partners, and I went to their events. Just showing up makes a huge difference in seeing them, right? They remember you. It makes a big difference to be there. So, not to mention, it's really cool to get to visit a new place you never visited before when you go there.
Absolutely. People are so happy to show everything, right? Wherever
Absolutely.
you go.
Yep.
They just want to show you everything, show you around.
Well, Victor, I know I would be very mindful. I know you had a hard out coming up, so I wanted to get this opportunity to kind of give you the stage and tell us a bit, where people can find you, like what kind of services you offer. I mean, for any of our listeners, right? Maybe it's from software companies or just other partners, people who may need developer shops, want to build, their own apps because we have a lot of partners who work in ERP space who may have ideas for very niche apps and want to build something. So, how do they find you? What do you offer?
Yeah. If you want to build a niche app, right? It's now. Now is the time, because now these niches are being filled up, and anybody who has a good insight, software development is relatively cheap. It's not what it used to be in the COVID times when money was basically free and developer salaries were infinite, right? It's actually better now. And so yeah, the time is definitely now. And so how do we help with that? Or general, right? We, at TrustShoring, generally what we do is we help SaaS companies mostly, but it's just build and run remote development teams. So that's the most important thing. How do we do that? Well, number one, we provide developers. So we headhunt, pre-vet. All of our developers are pre-vetted by an actual scale-up CTO. We have a network of freelancers. We have a network of tried and trusted software houses for any stack, any project size, any geography. And then we provide the advisory. So first of all, the high level, who are you? Where do you want to go? What's the best way for you? The independent, objective advice on, well, how should you develop your software? What do you need? What can you do? What can you not do? And what's the right roadmap for you to move forward? But then within your day-to-day and within the project, the actual fractional CTO, fractional CPO, before you need to hire one on your own, which doesn't make that much sense for most bootstrapped SaaS companies. And that's really it. And you can find us at TrustShoring.com. We have a YouTube channel that's growing pretty fast right now. So also youtube.com/@TrustShoring, where we help people. We give advice on how to build and run remote development teams and build software.
Awesome.
Well, Victor, I really appreciate you taking the time. I mean, you're in Germany, so it's pretty late tonight, right? It's late. It's late for you. So I really appreciate you staying late and having this conversation with us.
Yeah, absolutely no worries at all. This is my usual second shift for you guys across the pond. So that's
right.
That's normal.
Awesome.
Well, Victor, thanks a lot. Anything else that you'd like to say before we let you go to that next call?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure working with you, and so I highly appreciate this opportunity. And looking forward to catching up in Chicago in a few months. And
likewise,
yeah, great work. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks for being on, Victor. You have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
All right, thanks.